Atlantis first appears in two works by Plato, Timaeus and Critias, written in the 4th century BCE. That is the first evidence payoff. Confirmed, the famous Lost Island begins as a literary account inside Plato's dialogues. Confirmed, the story names a powerful island civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Disputed, whether Plato meant it as history, allegory, inherited memory, or a philosophical warning. The mystery is not just, where is Atlantis? The sharper question is, what kind of evidence do we actually have? The Atlantis case starts with a source card, not a dive site. Plato tells the story through characters who describe an ancient conflict between Athens and Atlantis. In the story, Atlantis is wealthy, powerful, and eventually punished after moral decline. That matters because the structure already feels like a warning. Confirmed, Plato gives us the oldest surviving full account. Disputed, the chain of transmission through Solon and Egyptian priests. Interpretive, Atlantis may work as a mirror for politics, power, and hubris rather than as a map coordinate. The strangest clue is the location phrase, beyond the Pillars of Hercules. That usually points toward the region around the Strait of Gibraltar. But that clue is not a GPS pin. It is a literary direction in an ancient text. Confirmed, Plato places Atlantis beyond the Mediterranean gateway. Disputed, whether that line should be read literally. Interpretive, the phrase may have been designed to push the story to the edge of the known Greek world. That is why so many maps can look convincing while proving very little. Then comes the timeline problem. Plato's story places the events thousands of years before Solon. That number is one reason Atlantis feels so ancient and powerful. But it is also one reason the case becomes difficult. Confirmed, the text gives a very deep time frame. Disputed, whether the number is literal, symbolic, mistransmitted, or part of the story's dramatic scale. If the date is literal, the archaeological burden becomes enormous. If the date is symbolic, then the search for a sunken city may be chasing the wrong kind of clue. Atlantis spread because it has the perfect structure for a mystery. A lost island. A destroyed civilization. A moral collapse. A location clue. And just enough detail to make people think the next map might solve it. That is why the story keeps producing candidates, Santorini, the Azores, the Caribbean, Spain, North Africa, and more. Each theory chooses a different piece of the text and treats it as the key. But a key only works if the lock is real. One of the most famous grounded theories connects Atlantis to the volcanic eruption of Thera, now Santorini. That eruption was real. Its effect on the Bronze Age Aegean was real. And the image of an island civilization damaged by catastrophe is powerful. But there is a problem. Santorini is not beyond the Pillars of Hercules. The dates do not line up cleanly with Plato's stated timeline. So the best label is disputed inspiration. It may help explain why the Atlantis story feels plausible, without proving Atlantis was Santorini. Modern geology creates another evidence card. The idea of a huge continent sinking recently into the Atlantic does not fit plate tectonics. That matters because many popular Atlantis theories depend on a vanished landmass. Confirmed, Earth science makes a recent lost Atlantic continent extremely unlikely. Disputed, smaller island, coastal, or cultural inspiration theories remain separate questions. This is where careful framing matters. Rejecting a lost continent does not automatically solve Plato's story. It only removes one very dramatic version of it. Every Atlantis location theory has to pass the same test. Does it match the source text? Does it match archaeology? Does it match geology? Does it explain why Plato used the story where he did? Most theories do well on one card and fail on another. That is why Atlantis keeps moving. When one map fails, the next one appears. The mystery survives partly because the target is flexible. The easiest way to misunderstand Atlantis is to treat Plato like a travel guide. Plato was a philosopher. His dialogues use stories to test ideas. In the Atlantis account, a powerful civilization becomes morally corrupt and collapses. That pattern matters. Confirmed, the story sits inside a philosophical dialogue. Interpretive, the island may be built to dramatize political failure, not preserve a sailor's chart. That does not make Atlantis boring. It makes the story sharper. The location trap is simple. Every proposed Atlantis map starts by choosing which clue matters most. Some focus on the Pillars of Hercules. Some focus on a disaster. Some focus on circular city design. Some focus on sea level change. But if a theory has to ignore half the evidence to make the other half fit, it is not solved. It is selected. That is why the evidence timeline is more useful than a single dramatic map. Atlantis also became a magnet for pseudo-archaeology. That does not mean every question is foolish. It means the standards matter. Real archaeology needs context, datable material, layers, artifacts, and independent confirmation. A shape on a map is not enough. A mythic resemblance is not enough. A dramatic documentary claim is not enough. The more spectacular the claim, the more careful the evidence has to be. That is the rule that keeps this case honest. So what would proof actually look like? First, the text would need to line up with the site. Second, archaeology would need to show a matching civilization. Third, geology would need to explain the destruction. Fourth, chronology would need to make the dates work. That is a high bar. But it should be high. Atlantis is one of the most famous lost city claims in the world. If it is real history, the evidence has to survive more than excitement. The evidence timeline is simpler than the legend. First, Plato writes Timaeus and Critias. Second, later readers debate whether the story is literal or symbolic. Third, Renaissance and modern writers turn Atlantis into a lost world engine. Fourth, pseudo-archaeology and popular media treat the story as a treasure map. Fifth, modern science narrows what is geologically possible. That timeline does not kill the mystery. It changes the question from, where is Atlantis, to, how did one philosophical story become a global search? The scarier explanation is that Atlantis may not be a place waiting to be found. It may be a warning that keeps disguising itself as geography. An empire grows rich. It becomes proud. It reaches too far. Then it falls. That story does not need ruins to stay alive. It only needs societies that recognize themselves in it. That is why Atlantis still works. It feels like a lost city, but it behaves like a mirror. So what is Atlantis, really? Confirmed, it is a story preserved in Plato. Disputed, whether it preserves any memory of a real place or disaster. Interpretive, its strongest function may be philosophical rather than geographical. The map is not enough. A coastline match is not enough. A flood story is not enough. To prove Atlantis as history, a theory would need text, archaeology, geology, and chronology to agree. So far, no candidate has done that cleanly. That is the final evidence card. Atlantis is easy to place on a map. It is much harder to place inside history. If Atlantis made you rethink lost civilization stories, stay with the Mystery Atlas TV. We follow the cases where the evidence is real, the theories are disputed, and the map is only the beginning. For Atlantis, what would convince you? A text match, a ruin, a geological disaster, or all three at once? That standard is the real mystery, and it decides whether Atlantis is a place, a warning, or both. Tell me your proof standard before the next case.